Rain falls against a Chicago apartment door. 3 knocks. Ava Mensah opens it to find a Korean man in an immaculate black overcoat, 2 silent guards standing behind him. He bows, slow, deliberate, the kind reserved for a debt. When he lifts his head, his eyes hold hers like he already knows exactly who she is.
5 years ago,
He says quietly.
you gave a stranger your father's coat.
Something about his voice pulls at a memory she can't quite place. He holds out a photograph, worn soft at the edges. Her, younger, laughing outside this very building. Before she can answer, headlights sweep around the corner. 2 black SUVs. His guards move instantly.
I finally found you.
He says.
Unfortunately, they found you too.
Every story like this one begins somewhere quieter than where it ends. To understand the man in that doorway, the bow, the photograph, the debt he says he owes her, we have to go back. Back to a Chicago winter 5 years colder than this one, when he was nobody at all, and she was the only person who noticed. 5 years earlier, Ava Mensah was 32 years old, chronically broke, and incapable of minding her own business. She worked as a community outreach counselor on the South Side, which was a polite way of saying she spent her days trying to keep other people's lives from falling apart, while her own quietly came undone behind her. Her landlord had sent 2 notices this month. Her fridge had exactly 1 thing worth eating in it, and her best friend, a nurse named Toya, liked to remind her, "Girl, you're 1 unpaid bill away from becoming one of your own clients." Ava laughed every time, because it was almost true, and because laughing at it felt safer than fixing it. Her father used to tell her that the smallest kindness could change the direction of somebody's whole life. He'd been a bus driver for 30 years, the kind of man who kept granola bars in his glove box for kids who looked hungry. He died when Ava was 26, but she still heard his voice sometimes, usually right before she did something reckless and generous her bank account couldn't afford. Marcus Reed, a retired firefighter who'd known her father for 20 years, had appointed himself her unofficial guardian after that. He showed up on Sundays with groceries he pretended he'd bought too much of, and he never let a visit end without saying some version of, "You can't save everybody, Ava." "I know. You don't act like you know." Then there was Daniel Diallo, a detective now, who'd known Ava since they were kids racing bikes too big for them down Halsted Street. Daniel had a habit of showing up at exactly the right moment, with exactly the wrong joke. "You look like a woman who hasn't eaten a real meal since Tuesday," he said one afternoon, dropping a paper bag of Ethiopian takeout on her desk without asking. "It's Thursday, Daniel. My point stands." He lingered a beat longer than he needed to, watching her dig into the food like it was the first good thing that had happened to her all week, and something in his expression softened in a way he was careful never to let her catch. Daniel had been in love with Ava since roughly the 8th grade, and had made peace, mostly, with never doing anything about it. Ava never noticed. She was too busy noticing everyone else. It was late November, the kind of Chicago cold that gets into your teeth, when Ava first saw him. He was sitting behind her apartment building, half hidden by the dumpster, wrapped in a coat too thin for the weather. He didn't ask for money, didn't look up, didn't do any of the things people do when they want to be noticed. If anything, he seemed to be trying very hard not to be seen at all. There was a bruise along his jaw, yellowing at the edges, days old. His hands were wrapped around nothing, just holding the cold in place. His posture struck her as strange, too straight, too controlled, like a man who'd been trained to sit that way, rather than one who'd simply fallen into it. Ava crouched down anyway. "Hey, you eaten today?" "Nothing." She came back the next night with a container of jollof rice, still warm. He didn't touch it. The night after that, she came with soup. He looked at it like it might be a trick. By the 4th night, she'd figured out the only way in. "I ordered too much again," she said, holding out a second container like it was an inconvenience. "You'd actually be doing me a favor." He studied her for a long moment, the first time he'd really looked at her, like he was trying to work out what she wanted in return. When he finally took the container, his hands were shaking, though not from the cold. It became a routine after that. Ava never asked permission anymore. She just showed up, and he never refused anymore. He just made a show of pushing the broccoli to the side of the container every single time, like it personally offended him. "So we're negotiating with broccoli now?" she asked one night, watching him do it for the 5th time. He didn't answer. He never answered. But on the 4th visit, when she made a comment about the guard dog next door having better manners than most men she'd dated, something shifted in his face. It wasn't quite a smile. It was the idea of one, testing the water. She noticed other things too, small things, she filed away without knowing why. He flinched at car horns, but not at raised voices. He counted exits in any room they sat near. Once, when a delivery truck backfired 2 blocks away, his whole body went still in a way that had nothing to do with cold. It took 3 weeks before she learned his name. "Min Jae," he said quietly, the night she finally asked. "Shin Min Jae." "You speak English." She said it like an accusation, mostly because she was surprised, a little because she felt foolish for the one-sided conversations she'd been having with him for weeks. "I remember pieces," he said. "Not everything." She assumed trauma. She'd seen it before, the mind protecting itself by boarding up whole rooms. She didn't push, she just kept showing up, kept talking enough for both of them, kept treating the silence between his sentences like it was worth waiting for. He let her believe what she needed to believe. The temperature dropped hard the first week of December, and Ava showed up one night with her father's old winter coat folded over her arm. Dark green, a little worn at the cuffs, the only thing of his she still kept close. "Here." Min Jae looked at it, then at her, and shook his head. "No." "It's ugly anyway," she said, pushing it into his hands before he could argue further. It wasn't ugly. It was the most meaningful thing she owned, and some part of him seemed to know that, because he held it like it might break. As she turned to walk away, she heard it, quiet, almost swallowed by the wind. "Thank you." She didn't turn around. She just smiled the whole walk home. If a story like this one is starting to settle into your chest, that's exactly what it's meant to do. Stay with us, because the next stretch of this journey is where everything quietly begins to shift. The weeks that followed didn't feel like charity anymore. They felt like something else, something neither of them had a name for yet. They met on park benches with coffee that had gone lukewarm by the time they got there. He listened more than he talked, but when he did talk, it came out sideways and dry, like a man out of practice. "You always look like you're judging clouds," she told him once, watching him stare up at the gray sky with that same unreadable expression he wore for everything. He glanced at her sideways. The clouds deserve it. They never deliver what they promise. It was the driest joke she'd ever heard, and it caught her so off guard that she laughed out loud, and for the first time, so did he. A short, surprised sound, like it had escaped before he could stop it. Walking shelter dogs together on Saturdays, she discovered a different layer of him entirely, a gift for calming animals that snapped and cowered at everyone else, a patience with them that felt older than anything he'd shown a person. "You're better with them than with people," she teased. "Animals don't lie about what they want," he said. "People do it constantly." It wasn't a joke that time, and she noticed. He had a habit of fixing things without being asked, the sticky lock on the shelter's back door, a wobbling bench, a scuffle between 2 men outside the soup kitchen that he ended with nothing but a few quiet words and a stillness that made both men back down without a hand ever being raised. Ava watched him do it and couldn't help herself. "What exactly did you do before all this?" she asked. "Because that wasn't nothing." "Management," he said. "Management of what?" He didn't answer that either, but something flickered behind his eyes. Fast, gone before she could name it. Headlights on a dark road. A voice shouting something in Korean she didn't understand. The word, air. Though she couldn't have told you how she knew that's what it meant. She let it go. She always let it go. Because whatever he was carrying, it wasn't hers to open before he was ready to hand it to her. Christmas came and went. Ava spent it the way she spent most things, giving more than she had. She brought him a small wrapped gift, a pair of gloves, nothing extravagant, and he stared at it for so long she thought she'd done something wrong. "Nobody's given me anything in a long time," he said finally. "That didn't come with a price." "This one doesn't," she said. "Consider it a returns policy, no strings, no receipts." He almost smiled again, almost. One evening, walking her home from the shelter, a car backfired somewhere down the block. Before Ava had even registered the sound, Min-jae was already half a step in front of her, one arm out, eyes moving fast across the street like he was counting doorways. Then, just as quickly, he lowered his arm and said nothing about it, like it hadn't happened at all. Ava said nothing either, but she noticed, and she kept noticing, long after the moment had passed. There was a night, not long after, when Toya found Ava sitting alone on her fire escape at 11 at night, knees pulled to her chest, staring at nothing. "Hey," Toya climbed out beside her. "What's going on?" "Nothing." Ava wiped her face fast, like she could undo it. "I'm fine." "You've said I'm fine to me in that exact voice at 3 different funerals. Ava, try again." Ava let out a breath that shook more than she wanted it to. "I spend all day telling other people it's okay to need help. I don't know how to take my own advice. I'm so tired, Toya, and there's nobody I can say that to without them trying to fix it." Toya didn't try to fix it. She just put an arm around her and let her sit there, quiet, until the shaking stopped, and neither of them mentioned it again. But it was the first time in a long while that Ava had let anyone see the bottom of her, instead of just handing it to everyone else's problems. One morning in January, she came around the back of the building with 2 coffees, already talking before she saw him, already halfway into a joke about her landlord's latest passive-aggressive note taped to her door. He wasn't there. The bench was empty. The spot behind the dumpster was empty. She waited an hour, then 2, telling herself he'd gone to find warmer shelter, that he'd be back tomorrow, that people like him didn't just disappear without. Then she saw the coat, folded with military precision on the bench, exactly where he always sat. Inside the pocket was a note, handwriting careful and deliberate, like every word had cost him something. "You reminded me who I was." She read it 4 times before she let herself cry. What she didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that a man named Chairman Han Do-jin, half a world away, had just been handed a photograph of an unremarkable Chicago outreach worker and told to file it away, in case it was ever useful. Han did nothing with it for years. He simply waited, the way patient men always do, certain that everything eventually becomes useful to someone who knows how to be still. 5 years is a long time to wonder what happened to someone. Ava never fully stopped. She told herself she had, some days, especially when the outreach center got busy enough to swallow her whole thoughts. But there were nights she still looked behind the dumpster on her way inside, half expecting to see him there. So when the knock came that rainy night, and she opened the door to find him standing there in a tailored black overcoat with 2 bodyguards behind him, the first thing she felt wasn't fear. It was recognition, slow and disorienting, like waking up in a room she used to live in. And once the SUVs had been dealt with, once his men had made a call and the street had gone quiet again, once she'd finally sat him down at her kitchen table with a cup of tea neither of them touched, she let herself really look at him, the tailored coat, the composure that came from command, not survival, the way the 2 men by the door watched him like he could end their careers, or their lives, with a single sentence. This was not the man who had once flinched at car horns. "You're him," she said slowly, "and you're not him. Both at once." "Both," Min-jae agreed quietly, "are true." She noticed it in pieces after that. The way you notice a photograph is slightly wrong before you can say why. The 2 men by her door didn't move until Min-jae gave the smallest nod. The square-jawed one nearest the window kept scanning the street below rather than the room, like the room itself had already been accounted for. Even Min-jae's stillness had changed. Before, it had been the stillness of a man trying not to be seen. Now it was the stillness of a man who no longer needed to be. Over the following days, Ava learned the shape of what he'd become, even if she didn't yet understand all of it. Shin Min-jae was the head of one of Korea's most powerful organizations, an empire he'd inherited, lost, and nearly died reclaiming, protected by men who called him Sir, with real fear in their voices. Somewhere in the wreckage of that first attempt on his life, a homeless man's leftover takeout and one stubborn woman's stubborn kindness had kept him alive long enough to try again. Chief Kang, his head of security, had been the one to find him hiding in an alley in Seoul 3 years earlier, half-starved and unwilling to trust anyone, and had refused to leave his side since. It was Kang who'd insisted, against Min-jae's protests, that the search for Ava be conducted properly, rather than left to chance. A debt like this isn't optional, Kang had told him flatly, the first time the subject came up. You pay it, or it follows you the rest of your life. Ava met him properly on only her second day back in Min-jae's orbit, a tall, square-jawed man in a black suit who scanned her apartment before he even said hello. You're the one who fed him broccoli against his will, Kang said, entirely without expression. Ava blinked. Excuse me? He mentioned it once. In 5 years I've heard him mention very little from that time. I remember the broccoli. It was, she would realize later, the closest thing to a joke Chief Kang was capable of making, and she filed it away like a small trophy. He tried to give her a penthouse. She stood in the doorway of the marble lobby, took one look at the chandelier, and said, I can't keep matching socks. You expect me to own marble floors? He renovated her apartment building instead, quietly, without asking. New heating, new locks, the leak in the ceiling finally fixed after 2 years of her landlord ignoring it. You're learning, she told him, and meant it as a compliment. They fell back into a rhythm that felt achingly familiar, though richer now, less guarded. At the Korean market, he taught her to pick a ripe persimmon by feel, laughing quietly when she got it wrong 3 times in a row. She taught him, in exchange, how her grandmother used to hum while she cooked, a habit Ava had never noticed she'd inherited until she caught herself doing it in his kitchen. In Korea, he told her once, watching her hum over a pot of stew, there's a word, jong. It doesn't translate cleanly. It's the bond that grows between people simply from time spent together, whether they meant for it to happen or not. We have something like that, Ava said. My grandmother called it sitting in it together. Same idea, less poetry. I like yours better. Ava taught Min-jae how to make her grandmother's cornbread. He burned it the first time, set off the smoke alarm the second, and on the third attempt produced something that was, in his own words, acceptable, under duress. In exchange, he taught her to make kimchi jjigae, correcting her grip on the knife with a patience that felt like tenderness, dressed up as instruction. She started keeping gochugaru next to her grandmother's cayenne, on the same spice shelf, and never once thought to separate them again. 2 bodyguards trailed them everywhere now. Men Ava had already nicknamed Serious Face and Extra Serious Face within the first week. You, she said, pointing at the younger one during a Saturday trip to the market, you definitely smile when nobody's looking. I've seen it. Don't deny it. The guard's jaw twitched, fighting it, and lost. Chief Kang, watching from a few feet away, allowed himself the smallest, driest exhale that might have been a laugh if you squinted. It was during one of those slow, ordinary evenings, steam rising off 2 bowls, the city humming outside, that Min-jae finally told her the truth about that winter. There was an attempt on my life, he said, not looking at her. My own people, some of them. I lost everything in a single night. Everyone who sheltered me afterward, a driver, a cousin, an old friend from university, they were found, and they were killed for it. Ava's spoon stopped halfway to her mouth. Except you, he said, because nobody believed a man like me would ever hide behind a dumpster and eat broccoli he didn't want. I made you eat that broccoli. I know. A faint, real smile. It saved my life, in its own way. She reached across the table and, without quite deciding to, took his hand. He let her. Without realizing it, he said quietly, you became the safest place I had left. Daniel noticed the change before Ava said a word about it. New security cameras on her building, an unfamiliar car parked outside her office, a man in an expensive coat who'd started showing up at community events with a wristwatch that probably cost more than Daniel's yearly salary. His detective instincts, honed over a decade, refused to stay quiet, and neither did the muscle in his jaw that ticked, every single time, at the way Ava looked at this stranger. He ran the plate on one of the SUVs, almost as an afterthought one evening. What came back made him sit very still at his desk for a long time. Not everyone watching from a distance had good intentions. In a high-rise office on the other side of the world, Chairman Han Do-jin studied a folder Chief Kang would have paid a great deal to intercept. Photographs of Ava at the outreach center, at the market, on the park bench, dated across several weeks. He adjusted his cufflinks the way he always did before making a decision he considered a formality, and smiled, faintly. The kind of smile that only ever showed up on his face right before something unpleasant had already been decided. "So," he said quietly to the man across the desk, he finally found his weakness. How generous of him to make her so easy to find. He closed the folder and said nothing further. Patient men rarely need to. "Ava," Daniel said, cornering her outside the outreach center a few days later, "do you understand who you're spending time with?" "I know who he is." "Do you? Because what I'm finding isn't management. It's international. It's ugly. People connected to him have disappeared. Ava. People connected to a lot of powerful men disappear, Daniel. That doesn't mean every one of them is evil. You don't know that. I know the man who fixed the shelter's front door for free because a woman's cat kept getting out. I know the man who cried reading a 5-word note I gave him. I'm not naive, Daniel. I just believe people can become something other than what happened to them." Daniel didn't have an answer for that. He just spun his keys, the way he always did when he was thinking too hard to speak, and walked away without saying the other thing sitting behind his teeth, that some small, stubborn part of him had hoped, all these years, that there'd never be a man who made her look like that. Min Jae, for his part, was preparing to leave again, quietly, without telling her. He'd survived long enough to know the pattern. Everyone who got close to him eventually paid for it. His driver, his cousin, the old friend from university. He wasn't going to let Ava's name join that list, no matter what it cost him to walk away from her a second time. She found the packed bag before he could explain it. "You don't get to decide what risks I'm allowed to take," she said, standing in the doorway of her own kitchen, voice steady even though her hands weren't. "You did that once already. You left a coat and a note and disappeared for 5 years. I understood it then. I won't accept it now. Ava, I didn't spend 5 years wondering what happened to you, just so you could protect me by leaving again." He stood there, jaw tight, cuff of his jacket caught between 2 fingers the way it always got, when he was working up to something difficult. "I still have it," he said instead. "The coat. Your father's." She blinked. "What?" "I had it restored. I carried it through 6 countries while I rebuilt everything I lost. I call it," he paused, like the word embarrassed him slightly, "home." Ava didn't trust herself to speak. She just crossed the kitchen and put her arms around him, and after a beat, he unpacked the bag. Chairman Han's patience ran out on a Tuesday. He didn't move against Min Jae directly. That would have been too obvious, too easily answered. Instead, he took Marcus. They grabbed him outside the hardware store, quiet and efficient, gone before anyone thought to call it anything but a strange disappearance. The message that followed was simple. Marcus meant nothing to Han. He mattered only because he mattered to Ava, and Ava mattered to Min Jae, and that, Han understood perfectly well, was a weakness worth exploiting. Min Jae's hands went still on the table, his jaw set, and when he finally spoke, his voice had dropped into something flatter, older than the one Ava had come to know. Ava watched him become a stranger in front of her, the composed, dangerous version of him she'd only heard rumors of, giving orders in clipped Korean, Chief Kang moving with the grim efficiency of a man preparing for war. This was the Min Jae the world feared, not the one who burned cornbread, not the one who cried over a 5-word note. "This isn't you," she said, catching his arm before he could leave the apartment. "This is what you were before I met you. They took Marcus because of me. They took Marcus to make you exactly what you're about to become. Don't give them that. I have to protect you. I didn't save your life," she said, voice cracking despite herself, "so the world could lose you anyway." The words landed like something physical. His shoulders dropped. His hands unclenched, one finger at a time, until the fury that had been holding him upright had nowhere left to go. If your chest just tightened reading that line, you're not the only one. That's exactly the moment worth sharing this story for, so more people find their way to it. He surrendered himself the next morning, alone, unarmed, in exchange for Marcus's release, a decision so quiet that half his own organization assumed he'd finally cracked under pressure and thrown his life away. Ava refused to believe that. She gathered everyone who mattered, Daniel, badge and all. His suspicion finally converted into something closer to loyalty than he expected of himself. Chief Kang, torn between protocol and loyalty. Marcus, bruised but unbroken, insisting on coming despite Ava's protests. And, unexpectedly, one of Han's own former lieutenants, a man who had watched Min-jae rebuild something worth respecting and could no longer stomach what his own boss had become. "He doesn't rule through fear," the man told them quietly, staring at the floor like the confession cost him something. "Not anymore. I've watched his people follow him because they want to, not because they're afraid not to. That's rare. Hans never understood how to earn something like that. They didn't have much time, and less certainty. Nobody knew exactly how many men Han had inside that building, or whether the exchange would hold, or whether Min-jae's surrender had already cost him more than any of them could undo." Kang studied Daniel for a long moment before he said a word, a police detective, asking to be handed the details of an operation that fell under no jurisdiction he had any legal claim to. Every year of training Kang had ever received told him no. "You'll follow my command structure," Kang said finally. "Not your badge. Wasn't planning on flashing it," Daniel said. Kang held his gaze a second longer, then nodded once and turned to brief him. The first time in 3 years he had let an outsider inside one of his plans, and the first time it had felt less like a risk than simply the right call. Daniel worked every contact he had left, calling in favors he'd been saving for a decade. Kang moved his remaining people into position without a single wasted word. Ava sat in the back of a car with Marcus's hand in hers, both of them silent, neither of them sure this would end the way they needed it to. It wasn't loud when it finally happened. It wasn't the kind of chaos the movies promise. It was careful and quiet, built on information and old loyalties, and Daniel's stubborn refusal to let bureaucracy slow him down. Han's own people, given the choice between blind obedience and a boss who had never once treated them as anything but disposable, chose to stand down, one by one, until the building simply emptied out around him. By the time it was over, Han's empire had collapsed from the inside, not through overwhelming force, but through the simple, devastating discovery that loyalty built on fear cannot survive contact with loyalty built on something real. Min-jae walked out of that building with his people intact, Marcus safe, and Ava's face the first thing he looked for. Daniel found him afterward, out by the cars, both of them still catching their breath from a night neither had wanted to live through. He held out a hand. Min-jae shook it. "I ran your background check 4 times, Daniel said. "Found 4 different men in there. And which one are you shaking hands with?" Still deciding. A pause, almost a smile. Leaning toward liking this one though. "Don't make me regret it." "I'd expect nothing less from Chicago's finest. Don't push it." But Daniel was smiling now, for real, and when Ava found the two of them a minute later, still trading jabs like men who'd simply taken the long way around to being friends, she didn't ask what had changed between them. She didn't need to. She could see it. Months passed before life settled into something that could honestly be called peaceful. There was a quiet afternoon, not long after everything with Han had finally been resolved, when Min-jae sat Ava down and handed her the restored coat, dark green, cuffs mended, exactly as she remembered it, except for one detail she hadn't known was there. There was something in the pocket, he said. I didn't find it for over a year. I think you never knew it was there either. He handed her a small folded note, the paper soft with age, her father's handwriting unmistakable even after all this time. No matter how cold life becomes, never become colder than it. Ava pressed a hand to her mouth. She hadn't known. She hadn't even remembered the note existed. Some scrap her father had tucked away years before he died, forgotten in a pocket she'd never checked. I carried it for 5 years, Min-jae said quietly. Every decision I made after that night, I made with those words in my head. I didn't become the man I am because of power. I became him because of that sentence, and the woman who gave it to me without even knowing she had. Ava couldn't speak. She just held the note against her chest and let him hold her. They went back to the park bench eventually, the same one, worn smooth in the same places, cheap takeout containers balanced between them like nothing at all had changed, though everything had. Min-jae pushed the broccoli onto her side of the container without a word. Ava laughed, the sound catching somewhere between joy and disbelief. So we're back to this? No, he said, and there was something different in his voice now, steadier, more certain than she'd ever heard it. Now we're negotiating forever. He didn't kneel. He didn't make a speech. He simply lifted the coat from beside him and settled it gently around her shoulders, the same way she had once settled it around his. Would you let me spend the rest of my life, he asked, protecting the woman who once protected me? She pretended to think about it, mostly to keep her voice from shaking. For someone who claimed to work in management, your timing still needs work. I've been told. She took his hand. But your heart finally got promoted. They sat there a while longer, coffee going cold between them, the city moving on around them the way it always did, indifferent to the fact that 2 people on a park bench had just quietly rearranged the rest of their lives. Then they got up, and they walked home together. No spectacle, no convoy, just 2 people who had learned, in their own separate ways, that the smallest act of kindness can change everything, if you let it. If this story reminded you that kindness is never wasted, even when it doesn't come back around for years, subscribe to Afro-K Tales and Chronicles for more stories like this one, and tell us in the comments what small kindness you'll never forget.